The first time my husband stopped saying my name, I did not notice for 3 days. I was 23 years old. It was the second week of February in Holmes County, Ohio, the kind of week where the snow on the north side of the barn had gone gray and crusted, and the light through the kitchen window came in thin and blue, like water that had been left out overnight. I was standing at the sink shelling the last of the dried lima beans my mother had sent over in the fall, and the kettle was breathing on the wood stove behind me, and the baby was asleep on a folded quilt on the floor, and my husband Amos came in from the milking and hung his coat on the peg by the door and walked past me to the table without a word. He sat down. He waited for his coffee. He ate the bread I set in front of him. He did not look at my face. And when he stood up to go back out to the barn, he said, "I will be in the west field after dinner." Not Martha, not wife, not any name at all. Just the sentence, dropped into the room like a stone into a well, and then the door, and then the cold coming in around the frame for a second before the warmth came back. I want you to understand something. In the outside world, a husband forgetting to say his wife's name for a morning is nothing. In my community, it was the first sentence of a paragraph the whole district had already written, and I was only just beginning to learn how to read. My name is Martha, and this is the Amish Stories, the channel where I tell you the things Amish women say to each other in the pantry when the door is closed, and the things we never say at all. I grew up old order in Holmes County, Ohio, on a dairy farm 3 miles east of a town so small, the map calls it a crossroads. I was baptized at 18, married at 19. I left at 26. If you are new here, please subscribe. Hit the like button if the story so far is holding you, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever lived with someone who could punish you without ever raising their voice? Where are you watching from? I read every single one. I promise. The Ordnung is not a book. People on the outside like to imagine a leather-bound rulebook on a bishop's shelf, but the Ordnung is not written down anywhere. It lives in the air of a kitchen. It lives in the way an aunt looks at you when you set the table wrong, and in the way a mother's hands do not stop moving when she tells you something you will remember for 30 years, and in the small tightening of a bishop's mouth when a young wife says one word more than she was supposed to. The Ordnung is the shape of a room you were born inside. You do not see the walls. You only feel the cold when you drift too close to one of them. Above the Ordnung is a hierarchy so old it feels like weather. God first. Then the bishop who speaks for God in the district. Then the husband who speaks for God in the house. Then the wife whose speaking is called yielding when it agrees and pride when it does not. Then the children who watch and learn what a woman's mouth is for. The word for the yielding is Gelassenheit, and the word for the failure to yield is Hochmut, and Hochmut is the cardinal sin of Amish women. Not lying, not lust, pride. A woman with an opinion is a field that will not take the plow. Everyone knows, no one says. There is a practice in some districts. It does not have an official name, but it exists the way many things in Amish life exist, where a husband who has been contradicted or refused stops speaking his wife's name until she has been reminded by silence of who she is. It is not called anything. It does not need to be. Every married woman in the district has felt it once, or watched her mother feel it, or watched an aunt go 2 winters without hearing her husband say her name at the supper table. You learn to recognize the shape of it the way farmers learn to read a sky. Amos and I met at a Sunday singing when I was 17. He was 2 years older, tall, with hands that had already thickened from harness work, and eyes the color of the wet stones you find in the creek behind our barn. He was not a talker. He was not cruel. He was the second son of a family 2 districts over, and when he asked to drive me home in his courting buggy that October, my mother touched the back of my neck the way she used to when I was a child with a fever, and she said, "He is a steady one, Martha." And that was as close to a blessing as she ever gave. We were married on a Thursday in early November. Roast chicken and creamed celery and 7 kinds of pie, 4 hours of preaching in my uncle's barn, and about 300 guests who ate in shifts on the wooden benches that had been carried in by wagon from 3 neighboring farms. Our first child, a boy we called Eli, came 14 months later, and by the time I was 22, I had 2 more small ones underfoot, and a garden that was the pride of my mother-in-law's Tuesdays, and a husband who came in from the barn and washed his hands and sat down and said, "Martha, is there coffee?" And I was, by every measure my community used, a good wife. The trouble started on a Wednesday in late January, and I want you to hear how small it was because the smallness is the whole point. We had been to a preaching service the Sunday before, and after the meal, in the pantry off the kitchen, one of the young married women, Rebecca, 21, married a year, no children yet, had been crying with her back to the door. Two older women stood over her the way you stand over a lamb that has stopped moving. Rebecca had said something at home, I gathered, about not wanting another baby yet. Not a refusal, a wish. A sentence spoken in her own kitchen to her own husband. And her husband had told his mother, and her mother had told her sister. And by the time the plates were being scraped that Sunday afternoon, the whole district knew that Rebecca had spoken pride. And she was being reminded quietly in a pantry with the door shut of the shape of the room she lived inside. I walked home from that meal beside Amos and the children, and I said, in a voice so low I almost did not hear it myself, "It was only a sentence, though. It was only a wish." I did not say it as a challenge. I said it the way you say a thing to the wind. Amos did not answer. He shifted the reins. He clicked his tongue at the horse. The buggy went on. The snow came down in the small, dry flakes that mean more snow tomorrow, and I thought the moment was over. It was not over. The first tear came on the Monday, and it came as absence. Amos said good morning. He said the blessing at breakfast. He said pass the butter and thank you for the coffee. He did not say Martha. Not that day, not the next, not the day after that. I told myself I was imagining it. I counted the hours between his sentences to see if my name would come. It did not come. It is a strange thing to sit across a table from a man who has said your name every day for 4 years and to feel that name go missing from his mouth. The name does not disappear from the air. It disappears from you. You begin to wonder if you were ever called it. You begin to wonder if you were ever called anything at all. The second tear came on the Thursday, and it came as my mother in her black bonnet on my porch at 9 in the morning with a jar of chow chow and a face I had seen her wear twice in my life. She came inside. She sat at my kitchen table. She did not take off her bonnet. She said, "Martha, I brought you the chow chow you liked as a girl." And then, while she was untying the strings under her chin and her hands were doing the small, ordinary work her hands had done for 40 years, she said, without looking at me, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes." That was all. She drank her coffee. She kissed the baby's head. She left. She did not say what she had heard, or from whom, or how far it had traveled. She did not need to. The chow chow sat on the counter for a week before I could bring myself to open it. The third tear came on a Saturday, and it was my sister-in-law, Ruth, Amos's older brother's wife, who had never once come to my house without her 3 children clinging to her skirts, and who came alone that day, and who spoke for 45 minutes about the weather and the price of feed and the health of an aunt in Indiana before she said, stirring her coffee in a slow, careful circle, "Some women think a marriage is a conversation, Martha. It is not. It is an obedience. The women who forget that have hard winters." Then she smiled kindly and asked about Eli's cough. The fourth tear came the following Tuesday, and it was the bishop's wife, a small, round woman named Anna, who had known me since I was in diapers, and who arrived at the door with a loaf of bread that neither of us needed and stayed for exactly the length of 1 cup of coffee, during which she said almost nothing, but looked at my face for a long, slow moment before she left, the way a woman looks at a piece of fabric she is deciding whether to cut. The fifth tear came at a quilting frolic in the second week of March. At my Aunt Susanna's house, 12 women around the frame, needles rising and falling in the small, companionable rhythm that has held Amish women together for 300 years. And this is the part I need to tell you carefully because it is the part that turned the winter. Her name was Lydia. She was 71 years old. She had buried a husband and 3 children. She had hands like the roots of an old tree, and she sat across the frame from me all afternoon, and she did not once look at my face. Near the end of the day, when the light through the kitchen window had gone the color of weak tea, and the other women were beginning to gather their thimbles into little folded squares of cotton, Lydia leaned forward to bite a thread with the 2 teeth she still had on that side, and without lifting her eyes from the quilt, she said, quietly enough that only I could hear, They do not hit us here, Martha. That is not our way. What they do is harder. They let the cold in until you ask them to close the door yourself, and then they close it, and they tell you it was your idea. She bit the thread. She did not look at me. She stood up. She put on her coat. She went home. If you have stayed with me this long, thank you. I know these stories are not easy to sit inside. If you want to keep going with me, subscribe to the Amish stories and turn on the little bell because I am telling more of these every week. And some of them I have carried for 20 years before I could set them down. Now let me finish this one. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the bed beside Amos, and I listened to the horses shifting in the barn, and to the tick of the clock on the dresser, and to my own heart in a body that had been working a long time. And I thought about the shape of the room I lived inside. I thought about the door Lydia had said they wait for you to close yourself. I thought about the 3 years since Rebecca had cried in the pantry, because that is another thing you have to understand. My winter of silence lasted almost 3 years, not 1 week, not 1 month. 3 winters of a man who lived in my house and drank my coffee and fathered my fourth child and did not say my name at the table unless another person was in the room. The decision, when it came, did not come as a decision. It came the way you know a season has changed. It was a Tuesday in late October. I was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. There were 4 of Amos's shirts on the line, all the same shade of dark blue, all the same cut, all pinned in the same way I had pinned my father's shirts as a girl and my grandfather's shirts before that. And I stood there in the yard with a wet basket at my feet and I looked at that row of blue shirts against the sky. And I understood without any drama at all that I was not going to grow old inside that row. I will not tell the story of the leaving today because it belongs to a different video, and it is a longer story than this one can hold. I will tell you only that I left with one canvas bag and a jar of egg money I had been keeping in a coffee can behind the flour in the pantry for 19 months. And that a Mennonite woman named Marlene, who ran a fabric store in town and who had asked me once, 3 years earlier, if I was all right, drove me to a bus station in the next county. And that when the bus pulled out at 4 in the morning, I did not look back at the fields because I had already been looking at those fields with my whole body for 26 years and I did not need to see them again to remember them. The shunning came the way shunnings come. The first letter I wrote to my mother came back unopened, the seal unbroken, my own handwriting on the envelope like the handwriting of a stranger. The second one came back the same way. The third one I did not send. I called the phone shanty at the end of my father's lane twice. At times I knew my youngest brother would be walking past, and both times the phone rang into a silence that had weight to it, a silence that was not empty but full of people deciding not to lift the receiver. My oldest sister passed me on the sidewalk in town 6 months after I left. She was carrying a basket. She was 3 feet from me. She looked through me the way you look through a window when there's nothing on the other side you want to see. My father, when I saw him one last time at a cousin's funeral from the far side of a gravel road, did not look at me at all. He looked at the ground between us as if the ground were the only honest thing in the county. I do not tell you these things to make you angry at them. I tell you these things because they happened, and because I lived, and because a story that is not told becomes a wall inside the person who is carrying it, and I am done carrying walls. The vocabulary for what had happened to me did not come until I was 29, in a small beige office in a town I will not name, across from an English therapist named Dr. Halberg, a small woman with reading glasses she was always losing, and 3 spider plants on the windowsill that leaned toward her as if they too were listening. She let me talk for 6 sessions before she said anything at all beyond, "Go on, Martha." And then, on the 7th session, she folded her hands in her lap and she said, "What you are describing is called coercive control. It is a recognized pattern. It has been studied. It has a name. It is not," she said, and she paired the 2 words in the air like she was setting them down carefully on a shelf. "It is not love." I cried for 40 minutes. She waited. When I could speak, she said, "Consent is not a door you walk through once at an altar, Martha. It is a door you have to be free to close again and again and again every day of your life. If the cost of closing it has been made unbearable, then what looks like yes is not yes. It is survival wearing the face of yes." She took her glasses off. She said, The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love. That is why they work. That is why women stay. That is why you stayed. And then she said more quietly, a community that cannot hold your questions does not actually trust its own answers. I want to be careful here because I owe the people I left more care than they were able to give me. Amos was not a monster. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside. He was doing what his father had done and what his father had done before him. And he could no more see the shape of the room he lived inside than I could see the shape of the room I lived inside, and the room was the mistake, not the man. The bishop was not a monster. He was a tall, gray bearded man who genuinely believed he was saving the souls of his district, and he sat in warm parlors with pie on the windowsill and offered coffee to women whose lives he was quietly narrowing. And he did it with a gentleness that was, in its own way, the most terrible thing about it. My mother was not a monster. My mother was a woman whose hands had never stopped moving in 47 years of marriage, and who told me the sentence about the cold in the house because it was the only sentence she had. And she gave me what she had, and it was not enough. And she knew it was not enough, and she gave it to me anyway. The system is the thing, not the people. I do not hate the Amish. I still make my mother's chow chow every fall. I still say the German prayer over my food when I'm alone. The community gave me a work ethic and a memory of what silence around a table can hold, and a faith that I have had to remake, but that I have not thrown away. It gave me sisters I have not spoken to in 7 years and whose faces I still see when I close my eyes. It gave me the language of stones and fields and the smell of hay in October. I carry all of that. I will carry it until I die. But I also carry this, and I need to say this out loud because I did not have anyone to say it to me when I was 23. And if I had, it might have saved me a decade. If you grew up in a place where your body was not your own and where the rules about your body were made by men who had never asked you a single question about it, I see you. If you have ever lain in the dark beside a person who had never once raised a hand to you and felt more afraid than a raised hand could have made you, because the punishment in that house did not need hands, I see you. If you have ever counted the days since someone said your name and told yourself you were being foolish and counted them again anyway, I see you. If you have ever said yes because the cost of saying no had been made unbearable by a whole village of people who loved you in the shape of a cage, I see you. If you were ever told that being a good woman meant making yourself smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of you that could refuse anything at all, I see you. If you have ever wondered whether the silence in your house was love or something wearing the clothes of love, I see you. You were not weak. You were not proud. You were not a bad wife or a bad daughter or a bad member of anything. You were surviving inside a system that had been built brick by careful brick over 300 years to make sure you could not refuse without paying a price so high that most women, most of the time, would choose the refusal that costs less, which is the refusal of themselves. That is not a moral failing. That is architecture. And the architecture was the mistake, and it was never you. Tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Tell me if you have ever sat at a table across from someone who stopped saying your name. Tell me if you had a Lydia, the woman who leaned across a quilting frame or a kitchen counter or a hospital bed and told you sideways what no one else would say. Because I want to know her name, and I want to know that she existed for you too. Tell me your story if you are ready. I read every single one of them, and I keep the ones that break me in a folder I go back to when I forget why I started telling mine. Subscribe to the Amish stories if you have not yet. Turn on the little bell. There is so much more I have not yet said, and I'm setting it down as fast as this quiet voice of mine can carry it. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. Your no is a whole sentence. It always was.